We will begin with the refuge and bodhicitta prayer. O sanje chedan tsoge chonam la chancho pardo dane chapsum je dage jinso gibe sunam je drola benjir sanje drobar sho Sanje chedan tsoge chonam la chancho pardo dane chapsum che dage jinso gibe sunam je drola penjir sanje drobar sho sanje chedan tsoge chonam la chancho pardo dane chapsum je dage jinso gibe sunam je drola penjir sanje drobar sho sanjen tamje dewa tan dewe judan dembra jurchi dongal dan dongal judan rawa jurchi dongal mebe dewa tampa tam mindrava jurchi nyeren chadang nitan dralwe tanyon shembola neba jurchi. The Dharma expands power. Savakanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times, who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious root Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Bless us that the Dharma become the path. Bless us that the path dispel confusion. Bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And now think to yourself that we must bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings throughout space, to the state of completely perfect Buddhahood. And in order to do this, we must engage in listening, contemplating, and meditating upon the Dharma. So think to yourself, please listen in this way with this meditation, this motivation of bodhicitta. And the Dharma that we are listening to is the verses on the Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu, as explained by the Ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje. And in this text, there are 8 chapters. We're discussing the 3rd chapter, the teachings on the world. The teachings on the 3rd area, the teachings on the world, has 2 parts: the world of sentient beings and the world that contains them. And so we have completed the first of these 2. So now we're talking about the second, the world that contains them. And so we began that yesterday. The world that contains them has 5 different sections. The first of the sections is the nature of the mandalas that support sentient beings, a general teaching of the container's nature. And then the second is an explanation of the particular places, and identifying the world of the 3000s. And fourth is the teaching that the 3000s, I'm getting it wrong. The world that contains them has 3 parts: the nature of sentient beings, the sizes of sentient beings, and units of measure. So we're talking about the first, and that has 4 topics: the general teaching of the container's nature, the explanation of particular places, identifying the world of the 3000, and teaching that the 3000s arise and are destroyed together. And so the first, there's the general teaching of the container's nature, which we discussed yesterday, with the nature of the mandalas and the mountains and seas that they support, that are on top of them, in other words. And that's the reason for these maps here. And we also got into the section of the discussion of the particular places, and we discussed the particular places for human beings. So I gave you all the homework yesterday, and as you can see, the members of our studio audience have completed their homework. I hope that those of you at home have also done your homework. The reason for this is not that we necessarily need a whole lot of these maps. The reason for doing this is just to get an idea of the scale of what we're thinking about in terms of scale. So before we get into the actual text, I just want to look at the homework that we had today. And so the members of our studio audience are all learning Tibetan, and so they also have written the names in English and Tibetan for everything. So here we have Mount Meru in the center, and Mount Meru is how long in each side? 80,000 leagues, right? And so here it's drawn to scale. And what's your scale? Okay, so the scale is 1 millimeter equals 1,000 leagues. Okay. See what happens when you start with a scale. You have a millimeter for 1,000 leagues. Now, 1,000 leagues is what? That's going to be 7,500 kilometers or 4,500 miles approximately. So it's all coming down into that very small place. That's Mount Meru. Then you've got the vast inner sea around it, and that's pretty big. Because you've got to remember, that's also the 7,000 miles across. That's bigger than the Atlantic, right? Smaller than the Pacific, bigger than the Atlantic. But this way to this way is bigger than the Atlantic and Pacific put together, probably, right? And then we've got the Yoke-Holder Mountains, and then another sea, and then the Plow-Holder Acacia Tree, and then so on and so on. Lovely to behold. Horse's Ear, and then where are we on the outside? What we've got here, Bowing Down, is on the outside, and the Ringholder Mountain. So they get thinner and thinner. And so here it looks like a fairly small line on the outside, but it's actually pretty thick. And then you get all the way up to the outer ring. Now, do you actually get up to the outer ring here? That is, oh yeah. And then there's on the other side. So even though our member of the studio audience started with a pretty big piece of paper and with a very small scale, it still didn't fit. And so then the question is, and so all of this is ocean, and then the labels for all of the things are here, the container of the world, the Chinugijikten. So where are the continents? Here they are. That is the eastern Lupapo, superior body, right? Lupapo in Tibetan, superior body. And then we've got way over here, I can't reach it even with a drumstick. There it is. I turned off the mic. No, there it is. So it's way over there. And then we've got, the Balangchut, Nup Balangchut. It's down here. And then on Pleasant Town, that's in reach. Okay, so these are, so we look at, and so here the drawing is to scale. And because the drawing is to scale, if you look over here at the Rose Apple Land, Zambulang, the Zambudvipa, right? So the Rose Apple Land is way over here. And look how small it is. So it's 2,000 leagues per side, 3 sides of 2,000 and one of 3.5, right? So at 2,000 leagues per side, you can hardly see it on here. But you have to remember, how big are 2,000 leagues? Like 2,000 leagues is going to be 15,000 kilometers. Pretty darn big. So if you take 15,000 kilometers, I would imagine that, well, that's going to be bigger than Eurasia, isn't it? I mean, how big is the continent of Eurasia in our current understanding? Forget about this. 15,000 kilometers is. I'm still an American. I'm so used to using miles for these. But now I'm getting confused as to which is which. At any rate, but 15,000 kilometers is going to be bigger than from the tip of. If you measure from the tip of India, the South Asian, the subcontinent, all the way up to the Bering Strait, that can't even be 15,000 kilometers, right? That's a long way, right? So despite the fact that these are really tiny on the map, they're actually huge. And what does that say about how huge all of the rest of this is, right? So this is the reason for doing this sort of an exercise, because we want to be able to, I wanted to have you all have an idea of the actual scale. Because when you look at diagrams of the maps in other places, they get the scale of this pretty well. But then you have these big, big things for the continents. And you'd think that the continents are actually that big in relation, but they're not. So this is why we're doing it like that, because look how tiny these continents are. And yet they're still huge pieces of land from our perspective as individual human beings. So actually the continents on this particular map are too big or too small for us to actually see the shapes. So that's why we have the second map. Map number 2. All right. Okay, so here we have map number 2, and you'll see that actually the essence of it is more or less the same. And another thing that's also on that other map that is not that is also shown on here is you've got the different colors, the different sides of Mount Mero. So here, on the other one, it's all shaded in. Here, it's just done with outlines. But in any case, it's showing you've got the blue on the south, and you've got the silver and the red crystal and the yellow and the gold. So that is this. Now, but what this cartographer did was, if we look at like here we look at unpleasant sound. And there's a little dot here, which is a pretty reasonable way to doing it, because basically unpleasant sound would be a little bit dot, and then there's an inset in the map. And so the unpleasant sound here is the 8 equal square, right? 2,000 on each side, square. So here in the map, it's 10 millimeters, or 1 centimeter per 1,000 leagues, so you've got a better ability to see the shapes of the continents. So there's the eastern, and then the southern. Here we have Jambudvip, and then we have Godinia, or the Bountiful Cow, on the west. So here we've got the shapes of the continents. So you can actually see them on this particular map. But we also have the little dots showing where they are, because again, the scale is just so ridiculous that unless you have an incredibly huge piece of paper, then there's no way you're going to be able to draw the continents to scale. Now, the other factor about the continents is that it doesn't specify in the text how far the continents are from this. And so this is something you probably noticed as you are making your drawings. So that is our second. So now we need to take away the second and reveal the third, which is showing this in a different perspective. Okay. Oh, you've got the thumb. Did Okay. We're going to have to do a little bit off of scale. Okay. Dig Gablo Manabe. Yeah. Okay. Okay. A placeholder to show the distance. Okay. Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, so here what we have is a map showing the scale of the amount of the different mountains. So here you have Mount Meru, the yoke holder, plow holder, and so forth. Each of the mountains in order. And then we also have the arrangement of the continents drawn up in this corner, and then the sea. What this one is showing now the depth all the way down to the bottom. So this is the mandala of wind way at the bottom. And then all the way from here is the mandalas of water and gold, which are not quite, what do we say? They're not drawn specifically on here. You've got the water of mandala of water, and then on top of that a mandala of gold. And the mandala of gold comes up to here. Now really this should be 3, but this is to kind of show the scale. Again, how far down it is from the bottom all the way up to the top. Okay? And then this is the outer rim here, right? Now this is one way of drawing them. The question is, are the mountains and so forth actually like pillars, like columns here that come straight up? And this is one way that there are other diagrams that show the mountains as being like pillars, and it doesn't really specify in the text when you're talking about the mountains. It does talk about it with regard to the continents in the part that we're coming to today. When we have the continents, and the continents are somewhere over here, and they're just too small on the map to be drawn. I think that's because you'd have like a single line that's going down to the bottom. Well, actually, the shape of the continents, there's a lot more that's under the water, under the level of the sea. It's like a mound of grain. And then the continent is just the top of the mounds of grain sticking on the top. So that is that's the basic setup of the world, of the four, the mountains. So here we're showing the depth. The other ones showed them from like an aerial view from space, or looking down at it from the form realm, perhaps. So this one is showing kind of a cutaway view. So this is good. It's just to get an idea of the scale, and I hope that some of you at home tried this as well, because once you have done this, you probably will not forget the difference in the scale. Now the problem with doing this, I can put this down now. I can easily. Okay. So we're switching microphones. I'm done with looking at that. All right, here I am, switching microphones. And one of the things that comes out is you might think to yourself, when you're making a mandala offering, then you have to have a huge, well, actually Mount Meru wouldn't be that big in the middle. There are all those other mountains there too that are actually much bigger in total area, surface area at least, than Mount Meru. And then the continents, what are you going to do? You put your pile of rice in the middle for Mount Meru, and what are you going to put for each of the continents? Like one grain on each side? When you're doing the mandala offerings, you are not making offerings to scale. You are not drawing a map. You are being generous, so you put on as much as you can for each heap, basically. Or basically, that's an opportunity for generosity. So it's a different matter. So those are not to scale. But you should remember when you're thinking about the Earth, basically just get an idea of the scale. How big is this planet that we're on? And it would probably be tiny on either of the first two maps that we looked at and compared to the universe. So this is the point of doing that exercise. I've actually wanted to do this exercise ever since I started teaching the Abhidharma. Get people to do it. I think we should get this is the sort of thing that we're missing in Shedra education. There are a few things about Western education that are good, but sometimes in monastic education, we need to do more audio-visual things like this. So now that we've finished with that, let us get on to the text. So we've spoken about the continents and so forth. And so now we've come to the description of the hell. So the continents, the four continents are the places of humans. And so they're like these 12, they're the continents and subcontinents, the 12 different lands of humans that on the map are just tiny. And underneath this one, underneath Jambudvipa, there are the hells. So we have come to the top of page 262, the places of hell. This is the second of the three sections on the particular places of beings. The places of hell has two topics, an explanation of the hot and neighboring hells, and the second is an explanation of the locations of the cold hells. So the explanation of the hot and neighboring hells has three topics: an explanation of the location of the incessant hell, an explanation of the locations of extremely hot in the other six, and an explanation of the locations of the neighboring hells. So, for the explanation of the location of the incessant hell, below this 20,000 leagues, the incessant hell is just that size. So if you go 20,000 down from Jambudvipa, from the surface, so 20,000 leagues down from the surface of Jambudvipa, so 20,000 leagues would be, what, 150,000 kilometers? Is that right? Or have I got my right number of zeros? Is that 15,000 kilometers? No, 150,000 kilometers, right? And then it's, the 20,000 leagues in three. It's basically, it's a box. It's a cubic box that is 20,000 leagues on either side, okay? And its walls and its cover and its top are all made of iron. It's filled with flames and the most unimaginable suffering that you could have. Below this rose apple, the commentary reads, below this rose apple land, 20,000 leagues, there is the incessant hell, so-called, which is the largest of the hells. It is just that size, 20,000 leagues in width and depth. So you've got a box of 20,000 leagues on either side under the ground. Now, remember, the rose apple land may be tiny, but it's like that, as it says at this point in the auto commentaries where it clarifies it. It's like the mound of grain with just the top. When you're making a mound of grain, it's not like you can make a mound like this with grain very easily unless you're starting with damp grain that'll hold together. But generally, a mound of grain is going to be kind of like this, right? And so in the middle of that, 20,000 leagues down, there's the top of the incessant hell. So the bottom of the incessant hell would be 40,000 leagues below. And the name of the incessant hell, it's so called because the suffering there is incessant. It never ceases. In the other hells, you have breaks from suffering. For example, the first of the hot hells is the reviving hell, where you wake up in hell and find yourself facing your worst enemy. You both have tons of weapons, and so you spend the next period of time killing each other. But because of the power of karma, you don't actually die. You go through all the pain of death, and you fall down, and then the cool wind comes, and so you've got the cool wind, which is a relief. And you're revived, and then you start fighting again. But in the incessant hell, there is no period of relief. So it is just continuous agony for your entire lifetime, which is extremely long, an extremely long lifetime in the incessant hell. And then the explanation of the location of extremely hot and other 6 hells. So above that, there are 7 hells. Above that incessant hell, there are the 7 hells of extremely hot, great wailing, crushing, black line, and reviving, one above another. So the names basically talk about the different types of suffering. We've talked about the reviving. The black line is where you get like injured, and it's like you got black lines going across your body. It's the crushing hell, you're crushed between mountains. The wailing hell, it's named after the sound because you're just wailing the entire. The great wailing is the wailing is even worse. Hot is, the other hells are hot, but this is even hotter. Extremely hot is just unbearably hot, and then, but still not quite as bad as the incessant, where you're constantly boiled in molten copper and things like that. So those are these seven hells. Or the 8 hot hells. So the 8 hot hells are underneath Jambudvipa, or the rose apple land. So basically you've got incessant hell and then one on top of another. And they're all kind of square. And on each side of each of the hells, there are 4 neighboring hells. Now, the neighboring hell is more the Tibetan name. In the Sanskrit text here, actually, they're called the extra hells, or the supplemental or extra hells. And so that is what is next described. And it says, an explanation of the locations of the neighboring hells. This has 3 points, not 2, as it says in the text. There are 3 here. There's the number of the neighboring hells, and all 8 have an extra 16. So all 8 of the 8 hot hells have an extra 16 perils or dangers. And so these, this means that on each side of each of the hells, there are additional 4 neighboring hells. So 4 on the east, 4 on the south, 4 on the west, and 4 on the north. And so that's 16. And that's for each of the 8 hells. So that's 8 times 16 is going to be, what, 128, isn't it? 128, yeah, 128 neighbor hells. And they're on each of their, and so the location of these hells is the locations of the neighboring hells, it says, is on each of their 4 sides. So there, here meaning the hot hells. So they are on each of the 8 hot hells, 4 sides. So on the 4 sides of the reviving, black line, and so forth, on each of their 4 sides, there are the neighboring hells. And the names of them are, there are the burning ground and rotten corpse, the razor road, and those, the river. So so there are 4 here. There's the burning ground, the rotten corpse, the raising road, which also includes 3 other hells, or two other that are similar, and then the unfordable river. So these are the 4 neighboring hells. So the first is the burning ground. So there are the burning ground, where Wangchuk Dorje says here, you sink into a burning ground up to your knees. The way it's described in the auto commentary is that when you touch your feet to the ground is so hot that your flesh and blood and skin all just burns right off. You lift your feet up, or any part of your body that comes in contact with the ground gets burnt and destroyed, and then you lift that body part off the ground, and it's instantly regrows. And then, of course, you can't stand on your other leg that's on the ground the whole time. You have to put another one down, and so just going back and forth. Then the next one is the rotten corpse, a filthy mire, which is a huge mire filled with sewage, essentially, where you just can't get out. And it's filled with basically it's a really disgusting hot place. The razor road and the others. So the razor road is where the ground is similar to the first one, the burning ground, except instead of the ground being burning, it's covered with razors. And so anytime any body part that touches the ground, it's just sliced to shreds, and the flesh and blood and skin all come off, and you lift it again, and it regrows. The forest of trees with sword-like leaves. So these are the trees with leaves that are like razors. They're like metal razor leaves. And as you go out of the hells, then, or as you go, you're trying to escape. And as you go through the forest, the leaves drop on you and slice you, and so forth. And then there are the grove of shalmali trees, of iron shalmali trees, or iron thorn trees. And so these are thorns that are 16 fingers. So a finger doesn't mean your finger width, it means your finger length, it's your finger width. This is 4, 8, 12, 16, so it's like that long, thorns of that length or so. So 16 fingers are side to side, basically. So when many of the beings who are born there have committed sexual misconduct. You're at the base of a hill, and there are all these trees in front of you, and your lover is on the top beckoning you to come. You try to go up to join him or her, and you get shredded by the spikes of the tree, which are facing downwards as you go up. You finally work your way up to the top, and you discover that your lover is no longer there. The lover is down at the base of the hill. And so what do? You go back to the base of the hill, and this time the thorns are all facing up. So you just get pierced on these. So these three hells, the razor road, the forest of trees, the sword-like leaves, and the grove of shamli trees, these are all similar in that you have the torment of being sliced by various types of weapons. So they're grouped as one. So all three of which are similar to weapons and thus grouped together. And then the unfordable river of boiling ashy water. So you've got boiling water with a lot of ash in it. And on either side there are guardians of the hell, so who are holding spears and javelins and weapons of all various sorts. So when you try to get out of the boiling water, then you're immediately pushed back in by the guardians of hell, who have with their weapons. So you can't get out of the water, you can't stay in the water. It's just a dreadful, hellacious experience. So. That's the suffering of these. Now, in the Abhidharma, it doesn't go into as much length about the sufferings of the hells. They're taught in some of the sutras. They're very well encapsulated. I think one of the most, inspiring descriptions of the sufferings of the hells is in Patrul Rinpoche's Words of My Perfect Teacher. So if you want to get more detail about the descriptions, then you should look there. But here there's a problem, because we just talked about how they're guardians of the hells who are standing on the banks of the unfordable river, who are pushing you back in. And so what are these guardians in the hell? This is not covered in Wangchuk Dorje's commentary, but it is talked about in the auto commentary. And basically, you could either say that they are sentient beings or that they're not sentient beings. Vasubandhu's position in the auto commentary is that they're not sentient beings, or at least that's the position that he presents as the main one, that instead they appear out of the force of sentient beings' karma. What animates them is that force of karma. For example, it's just as there are the winds that blow and move the elements around as the universe forms. In the same way, the guardians of hell are not animate, but they move as if they were by the force of beings' karma. Another explanation is that the beings in hell are actually sentient beings, and this is he presents this as, an opponent or a minority opinion, not the one that he's presenting as the main opinion. And then the question is, well, if they are actual sentient beings, then they're engaging in horrible actions. And so then where are they reborn? And the answer to that is that they would be reborn within the same hell in which they engaged in torturing sentient beings. So if you're reborn as a guardian of hell, it's bad. Then the other feature about the guardians of hell, for example, you have the guardians in the incessant hell who stuff people into the pots of molten copper and pour more molten metal down their throats and things like that. And so how is it that you're in these extremely hot environments? How is it that they don't get burned? And there are two different explanations given in the auto commentary. One is basically that the force of karma means that there's like a boundary around each of them. You could say that they're each a more contemporary term, and I don't know if people are going to be happy to hear this now, is like a protective bubble. People are talking about protective bubbles now, but that's different than the protective bubble that the guardians of hell would be in. Another explanation is that because of that they are unable to be burnt because of the particular configuration of the elements that make up their bodies. So those are the 8 hot hells and the surrounding neighboring hells. So now we've come to an explanation of the locations of the cold hells. So so here it says 8 other cold hells, blisters, etc. There are 8 more hells that are other than the hot hells in both type and location. They are the cold hells of blisters, etc. So blisters, bursting blisters, chattering teeth, whimpering, howling, cracked like an utpala, cracked like a lotus, and greatly cracked like a lotus. So these are they're all unbearably cold. Their name comes from, basically describes either what happens to your body or the sound that you make. So blisters is just so cold that you get covered with blisters that kind of burst open. Burst blisters is the first one. The second is so cold that the blisters burst. And then chattering teeth, as the sound of the teeth chattering must be quite loud. Whimpering and howling are again according to the sound. Then cracked like an utpala. An utpala is like a blue lotus. Cracked like a lotus and greatly cracked like a lotus. So that's what happens to your body as it freezes in hells. So those are the 8 cold hells. Now here in Wangchuk Dorje's commentary, it doesn't describe the location. And there's a little bit of dispute about them, but generally what the commentary says is that they're also underneath Jambudvipa in that same sort of mound that leads to Jambudvipa, and they're on the same level as the 8 hot hells. So somewhere off to the side on the same level. So the lowest, the greatly cracked like a lotus would be on the same level as the incessant hell, and then the others would be on top of that. So those are the cold hells. Now those never get as much of a description as the hot hells, but that doesn't mean that the suffering is any less. Then there are also occasional hells. It says of the occasional hells in the auto commentary, their location is uncertain. They are in rivers and mountains, wastelands, other places, and also below. So basically, there are just a whole lot of other types of hells that arise out of the karma of either one being or multiple beings, and they happen in many different ways. So there are all sorts of hells that are in other indefinite locations. So rivers and mountains or deserts are the ones that he specifies, but also below, so underground. So these are the occasional hells. And when you read sutras or when you read the Vinaya texts, and the Buddha will talk about the sufferings of beings who are in these occasional hells from time to time. So they're all different. You can't really say what they are, but none of them are much fun. So those are the hells. So that completes the description of the places of the hells. And so we've talked about the places of the human beings. We've talked about the places of the hells. The next main part of the text, of the root text, talks about the places of the gods. But we also have 2 other classes of beings. We have hungry ghosts, and we have animals. So animals, well, let's see. The animals are kind of easy to see because we see them. The animals have as their sphere land, water, and the sky. So we get, just as we see them here, they can be in the water, they can be in the land, and on the sky. Also, a very interesting comment in the auto commentary is like their basic place where they started was the oceans. I thought that was very interesting. If we think about it in terms of Darwinist, the evolutionary perspective on where animals start in the primordial soup of the ancient oceans, before when there was Gondwania or whatever it was called, and of course no one called it anything back then, according to the Darwinist presentation of the Darwin. So what am I saying? Evolutionary? Whatever we say. Anyways, an interesting parallel. That's all we better say about that. So that's the animals. And then there are the places, the hungry ghosts. So the hungry ghosts, when we think of hungry ghosts, and you've probably read about hungry ghosts in either the Jamgon Cultural Torch of True Meaning or in the Words of My Perfect Teacher by Pato Rinpoche or some other text. The hungry ghosts, we think of beings who are unable to get food or water, but actually there are some people, some beings in the hungry ghost realms who are actually pretty wealthy. For example, a Yama. Yama is officially a hungry ghost. So there are a few well-to-do, shall we say, hungry ghosts. So the hungry ghost, whose king is named Yama, lived mainly 500 leagues below the city of Rajgir in the Rose Apple land. So below Rajgir, so 500 leagues. Now, of course, if you're going 500 leagues below, it's like, if you're 500 leagues below Rajgir and the place has any size similar to anything, there's going to be probably below Bodh Gaya and Delhi as well as Rajgir, but it's and probably off into other parts of the other world. Anyways, it's 500, the main location. But it's also said in other sources that, and it says mainly, there are other hungry ghosts who live in other locations as well. So those are the 4 of the 5 types of wanderers, right? So we have one more type of wanderer left, which are the gods. So the next section talks about this, and this has the places of the gods. The description of the places of the gods has 2 parts, 2 topics, the actual and additionally distinctions of their inhabitants. The actual has 2 topics, those connected to the earth and those not connected to the earth. So they're the lands of the gods that are actually connected to the physical universe, and there are those that are not. And we need one of those other maps up, unfortunately. So okay. We need to have one of the maps that shows all of the different lands. So let's put this one back up. Okay, so here we are. So those connected to the earth and those not connected to the earth. Those connected to the earth has 2 topics, the realm of the 4 great kings and the realm of the 33. So the realm of the 4 great kings has 2 topics, the palaces and the places on the mountains. So the palaces says 4 topics. The first of these, the palaces, says 4 topics, measuring the sun and moon, the way they, that is, the sun and moon, function, distinctions of the season that depend upon them, and 4, the reason why the moon waxes and wanes. Now, the reason why they're called palaces here is that actually the sun and moon are palaces of the gods. So this is why it's called palaces. The sun, moon, and stars are all palaces of the gods of the realm of the 4 great kings. So that is why they're included here. So to measure the sun and moon, this has 2 points. The altitude of the sun and moons. The sun and moon are at mid-Meru. That means they're halfway up Mount Meru. So we've got Mount Meru is 80,000 in height. So if that Mount Meru is 80,000 leagues in height, then the sun and moon are at what? 40,000, which is the same level as the plow holder. Or is it yoke holder? Yoke holder is first. So as it says here, the sun and moon are at the middle of Mount Meru. They orbit at the same altitude as the peaks of the yoke holder mountains. Okay. Now, how big are they? The sizes of the sun and moon, 50 plus 1 in diameter. The orb of the moon is 50 leagues, and the orb of the sun is 50 plus 1, or 51 leagues in diameter. Like when you have an eclipse, when you have a solar eclipse, the moon doesn't quite cover the sun. Why is that? It's because the moon is only 50 leagues across and the sun is 51, right? They're 6 1/18 leagues in depth. So they're like, what do we say? They're like cake layers. Okay, so they're cake layers that are 6 1/18 leagues in depth and 51 leagues around. The moon is made from water crystal and the sun from fire crystal. So water crystal is cooling and so forth. Fire crystal has like warm, like warm qualities. Their shapes are fine and lovely to behold, and they are inhabited by the divine children, sun and moon, who have great wealth, and their entourages. So the sun, Surya, lives on the sun, and the moon, Chandra, lives on the moon, right? And so the gods live on the top. And even though Surya lives on the top of the sun, and underneath it's very hot, by the power of karma, according to the auto commentary, the heat doesn't go up, the heat goes down. The light shines down and so forth. So the gods, Surya on the palace of the sun, is just enjoying himself. And all of his entourage, his children and so forth, and they're all enjoying themselves on this kind of cake layer of the sun that's sort of floating around 50 leagues. Then there are also the stars, and the stars aren't listed in the root, but they're talked about separately in the auto commentary in here. The largest of the stars are 18 earshots, and the smallest are 1 earshot in size. So an earshot is that long. That's 1. Basically, about we could say it's a fathom. This is not an earshot. This is a fathom, or an arm span, or a fathom. We'd call it in English. And if you have 500 fathoms, that is 1 earshot, because that's about 3,000 feet, which is about 1 kilometer. That's just about as far as you can hear someone. So you want to be 1 ear. When you have a monastery, you want it to be 1 earshot out of town, so that you aren't disturbed by any hubbub that's happening in the great metropolis or village that you are outside of. Okay? So the smallest are 1 earshot in size, and then the largest are 18 earshots in size. So that would be 18 times, 18 kilometers. Easy with kilometers, right? An earshot is about 1 kilometer. Okay. 12 miles or so. No, not 12, 11 miles. The way they function, so midnight, sunset, and midday, and sunrise are at the same time. So you've got 1 sun and moon for the entire universe. So midnight, sunset, and midday, and sunrise are at the same time. So the way a single sun and moon function in all 4 continents is that midnight in northern unpleasant sound. So here on this one we have north on top, right? So in unpleasant sound it's midnight. Sunset in the east. And then we have noon in the south, in the Rose-Apple land, and we've got dawn in the west at Bountiful Cow. So in other words, what it's saying is at noon you've got the sun directly above your head, right? So it's down over here, and so at that point you can't see the sun when you're in unpleasant sound. So it's midnight. And here it's just coming up over this horizon in the southeast. And then over here it's just setting, right? So the sun is going in a big circle. It's got to be going pretty fast. When you think about it, it's a long way for that sun to cover, right? So the sun is just going to be racing around the sky all day long. And the gods who are on top of the sun, they're having a great ride, I'm sure. So you've got the sun just racing around and the moon also racing around, and they're not quite going at the same rate. So this is an interesting question, because if you have noon when it's dawn in the Rose-Apple land, then it's going to be noon over here. And so when it's dawn at Rose-Apple land, where is the sun going to rise from? Because we see the sun rising from the east, right? But actually, if the sun's over here, it's going to be way off in your northeast, right? So this is a part where the traditional presentation has a little bit of a problem. And then the sun would still be at 40,000 leagues. So you wouldn't see it come up from over the horizon. You'd see it come from way over this little tiny thing in the way off in the northeast. It would come whipping around an arc over the. So this is the orbits of the sun and moon are problematic in the traditional presentation, shall we say. They do not match what we see with our naked eyes. So what do we say? Have I read all that commentary? In the same way, when it is midnight in the east, it is sunset in the south, noon in the west, and dawn in the north, and so forth. The order of times is related in this way. So that's how the times of day cycle around. So the distinctions of the season that depend upon them, in particular the way the sun and moon move. This is 3 points. When the day length changes, after the second rainy month's 9th day of waxing, nights grow longer. And then in the 4th month of autumn grow shorter. Days are the reverse. So here is a question of how many months you have and when you consider New Year's, what you consider at the beginning of the month, and it's all different. I mean, as any of you who've dealt with Tibetan calendars know that there are many different versions of calendars. In Tibet, there's the standard one, the Poluk, and then there's also the Tsurluk that we use, and then there's the Bhutanese, and everywhere, pretty much every village in the Himalayas seems to have its own separate calendar sometimes. So, but generally when we're talking about here, the first you have autumn, the second season is spring, and the third is the rain season. So you've got these 3 main seasons, and the first is the autumn. So each of these, the autumn, spring, and summer mentioned here, each have 4 months. The 4 autumn months are Ashvina, Kartika, Margashirsha, and Pesha. The 4 spring months are Magha, Phalguna, Chaitra, and Vaishakha. The 4 rainy months are Jyeshta, Asad, Shravana, and Bhadra. So the first autumn month, Ashvina, begins on the day following the full moon of the 8th month of the Tibetan calendar. Now here, there is debate about this. Some astrologers would say it's the 8th month of the 7th calendar. Some would say it's the 9th calendar. So it's really difficult to figure out exactly how it relates. But in general, when you're talking about the 8th month of the Tibetan calendar, you're talking about September, late September, early October. Okay, so the full moon is the last day of the month, and then the next day, what in Tibetan is called as the 16th day, actually is the first in the traditional counting described here. And it continues 1 month until the next full moon. So basically, the months start on the day after the full moon, and they proceed to the next full moon. It is followed by the second autumn month, Kartika, and then Margashirsha, and so forth in order. In this tradition, the waning phase is presented as the first half of the month, and the waxing phase the second. So the waning phase is when the moon gets smaller, and the waxing phase is when it gets bigger. So the month of Jyeshta, that is the first of the 4 rainy months, begins from the day after the full moon or the middle of the Tibetan summer month, which would be May and June, and continues until the full moon of the last Tibetan summer month. Hang on, I think that's right, because the Tibetans have 3 summer months. And then from that day after the full moon until the full moon of the first Tibetan month of autumn is the second month of rains, or the rains, the month of Ashada. So this is when we have the rainy season retreats. On the 8th day of its last half, or waxing phase, the days are 18 hours long and the nights are 12 hours long. 30 hours in a day, okay? So it's not a 24-hour day, it's a 30-hour day. Each hour, there are 30-hour day. Each day has 30 hours, each hour has 30 minutes. So that means that the hour that we're talking about, when you have a 30-hour day, then each hour would be equivalent to 48 modern minutes, okay? So after the second rainy month's 9th day of the waxing phase of moon, the nights grow longer and the sun's days grow shorter. So this is basically saying that the second rainy month, and in its second half, in the waxing phase, from the ninth day of that, that's the solstice. And it doesn't quite line up with our Western conception of, or astronomical conception of the solstice as being around the 21st of June. And it could be actually that these the times of the month are very difficult to calculate, and apparently there's been a little bit of a shift in the over gradual shifts every year of where the constellation fits according to the seasons. So there's been about a month's shift. So it could be that it seems like this is saying that solstice is about a month later than it seems to us now, but it could just be that there has been enough of a shift over the 2,600 years since this was described. Of course, Vasubandhu was 1,000 years after that, but it's been enough of the shift over that time that the months kind of got a little bit out of whack. And the names of the months got out of whack with I don't know. Anyways, it just seems like things might have gotten a little bit off. Anyways, that's the summer solstice, and from the summer solstice then until the winter solstice, which is from the commentary, it says the nights grow longer from the 9th day of the waxing phase of the second rainy month, Ashada. But actually the rainy month usually starts around, in India these days, the first rainy month starts in late June, around the solstice. So I'm not certain, have weather patterns shifted over the centuries or what? And this is something that someone who actually was interested in like meteorology and that would have to research, and I'm not going to bother with it. At any rate, it's an interesting, one of those things that you can waste a lot of time speaking about. Then on the 8th day of the last half of the 4th month of autumn, remember we've got 4 months. We've got 4 months of the rains. Sometimes it's described as 3 months of rains and then a month of second rains. And then you've got 4 months of autumn, and then 4 months of spring. They don't count winter separately when you talk about it in terms of 3 seasons. Then on the 8th day, the last half of the 4th month of autumn, the sun reverses, and from the 9th day lights grow shorter. So this is after the winter solstice. The nights grow shorter and the days grow longer. The days are reverse of that and grow longer. From the commentary, for the 9th day of the last half of the 4th month of winter months, they grow shorter. That is, the nights grow shorter, it is said. This is from the 9th day of the waxing phase of the second spring month. The days or nights by minutes lengthen. So the amount of change in daylight from one day to the next, in the first, between the winter solstice and the summer solstice, you've got the days lengthening, and the amount of time that they lengthen by is 1 minute. Now again, this is a minute that is measured as 30 hours per 24 per day, and 30 hours per day and 30 minutes per hour. So that means that each minute is 96 seconds. Alternately, you can say that a minute is 12 breaths. So we breathe 21,600 times in one solar day, and so 21,600. If that is the rate, then 12 breaths takes 96 seconds. Either way, you get to 96 seconds. Okay? So the duration of a minute is 1/900th of the length of a day and a night. According to the Kala Chakra, it's the duration of the inhalation, holding, and exhalation of 24 breaths. Yeah, 24. That's 20. Yeah, that's right. Okay. 24. Something else. The auto commentary said 12. So the Kala Chakra and the auto commentary seem a little bit off. I have to do my math. Sorry. This is explained as 4 moments, so each moment there are 6 breaths. Or is it? No, 24 breaths is right. I'm getting myself confused. It is 24 breaths. For the 90, yeah. Okay. So the position of the sun in the sky. Now the reason why the days and months lengthen is that the orbit of the sun is not always the same. So sometimes the orbit shifts a little bit to the north, and sometimes it shifts a little bit to the south, and that's what changes the length of the days. Then there's the moon, and the moon waxes and wanes. And so how is it that the moon waxes and wanes? You've got the moon and the sun are both at an altitude of 40,000, spinning around this entire universe at a great breakneck speed. the gods on there hanging on for dear life. Actually, because they don't have to worry about it. They're just on there. For them, it's fine because they're just going along at the same speed as their orbs are going. But how is it that the sun and moon? How is it that the moon, in particular, waxes and wanes? Well, the moon and the sun move at different rates, and so when the moon gets closer to the sun, then it's as it says here: "For moving too close to the sun, moon shades itself with its own shadow." So what causes the moon to wane, you ask? From the house of the moon moving too close to the house of the sun, the light of the sun falls on the moon, and the moon's own shadow falls on the opposite side, so it appears as if the mandala shades itself with its own shadow and wanes. So in other words, the light of the sun is brighter than the light of the moon. So the light of when the moon gets too close to the sun, then the sun's kind of hits that rim, and then everything else is in shadow. It's like when you have a lamp. If you're holding the lamp far away from a pillar, then you can see the whole pillar. But when you bring the lamp closer and closer to the pillar, the closer you get to the pillar, then you only see a little bit of the pillar, and the rest of the pillar is hidden from it. So that's the main difference for the reason. Okay, so those are the places of the gods who live on those celestial palaces. And then there are places on the mountains. So first is so this is two topics: explanation of the terraces on the supreme mountain, and which gods live on which mountains. And so the explanation of the terraces on the supreme mountain, that is Mount Meru. On that, Mount Meru, there are 4 terraces, the distance between which is 10,000, extending 16,000 leagues, and 8 and 4 and 2,000 leagues. So on this supreme mountain, there are 4 terraces, the distance between which is 10,000 leagues. So you've got your supreme mountain, and it's 80,000 leagues high, right? So you've got 4 terraces that go up 10,000 each. So you've got the first terrace is at an altitude of 10,000, second terrace is at 20,000, third at 30,000, fourth at 40,000, and then you've got 40 more up to the summit of Mount Meru. Okay? Now the widths of these or the distance they extend out. The first extends out by 16,000 leagues. So it's like you've got, the first is, you've got 16,000 leagues for the first, and then the second is 8,000 leagues, the third by 4,000, and the fourth by 2,000. So they're kind of successively broader. So it's like the mountains going in, stepping in like that. The terraces start from the base, so they come up to the middle of the supreme mountain. If you want to draw a picture, you may, but we won't necessarily show them tomorrow. And which gods live on which mountains? This has 2 points. Which live on the supreme mountain, that is Mount Meru? The basin holders and garland holders, the always intoxicated, and the gods of the 4 great kings' realm live there. That is on the 4 terraces. So you've got the 4 terraces. On the first of the 4 terraces, there live the yakshas called basin holders. So yakshas are types of gods. Okay? On the second, there live the garland holders. On the third, the always intoxicated, the divine stoners. And then on the fourth, you have the gods of the 4 great kings' realm. So the gods of the 4 great kings' realm means that the 4 great kings and their immediate families and retinues. So you have Dhritarashtra on the east, Virudaka in the south, Virupaksha on the west, and Vaishravana in the north, along with the gods and their retinues. So you've got all of the so on the 4 different sides, you've got the 4 terraces with these different types of gods, the 3 types of yakshas, and then the 4 great kings. Okay? And then the second point here is which live on the 7 gold mountains. So remember these 7 mountains are made out of gold. The cities and villages of these gods are also in the 7 mountain ranges of the yoke holder and so forth. So in other words, the basin holder and garland holders, always intoxicated, and the other gods of the 4 great king realms, they also live all over this whole area. The class of gods of the 4 great kings is much more numerous than the other classes, either individually or together. In other words, this is the most populous level of gods. It's kind of like how you have termites in the animal kingdom. The termites are like the most numerous. Well, actually, I don't know that the termites are necessarily more numerous than all their animals, but termites are like the most numerous animal on earth. So like the great kings of the great kings, gods of the great king realm, there are more gods in this class than in all the other classes combined, or either individually or together. And the places of the gods, when you look at our map, we've got this huge area for the places of the gods, and look at the tiny area we have for humans. The animals are doing okay because they've got oceans, I suppose, but generally we'd say that the god realms are huge. The gods get a lot of real estate. Okay, so that is enough for this afternoon's teaching. So we will recite. Please dedicate the merit of teaching and listening to the Dharma for the benefit of all sentient beings. O sanam devitam jesebani tovnenye pedranam pamchene Kegana chimbala trobai sibetso